Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. Thank you to all the elite members of the channel. I highly appreciate your continuous support. With that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Ghost Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. Right after the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. I was 10 when my life splintered. Quietly, violently, and in ways I still can't fully explain. My father inherited a house in remote New South Wales from a relative we'd never met. Some great uncle whose name sounded made up. The kind of family myth that gets told with a drink in hand and a shrug. Dad saw it as a fresh start, a place far from the city where the silence could stitch us together as a family. Instead, it unraveled us. The house was deep in the bushland. You could stand on the front porch and see nothing but trees, a sea of twisted gums and dense scrub that seemed too close in more each day. Like the forest was slowly reclaiming us. The house itself was the Victorian era, sprawling and tired, all creaking timbers and dim hallways that bent in places that shouldn't. It was picturesque in that haunted postcard kind of way, until the sun went down. There were 5 of us: my father, mother, my older sister, Lucy, and me. We moved in full of hopeful energy and naive wonder. But even then, the house felt wrong, like it had been waiting too long for someone to come back. The first few days passed quietly. My father dove into renovations like it could fix whatever rot clung to the place. My mother busied herself with curtains and paint samples. Lucy and I explored the property, which included a dilapidated barn and overgrown garden with stone statues that eroded into vague weeping forms. It was the 4th night when I saw it. I was in bed reading, the kind of kid who stayed up too late with a flashlight under the covers. The room grew suddenly cold. Not the kind of drafty old house cold, but a breath on your neck kind of cold. The shadows deepened, pooling in the corners. I felt it before I saw it. That ancient primal instinct of being watched. I looked up. There, peeking around the doorframe, was a figure, not fully formed, a silhouette darker than the hallway behind it. Shoulders, a head, still, watching, no breath, no sound. I froze, every muscle locked. It stayed there, silent and deliberate, until it simply wasn't, like it slipped backward into the wall. I told myself it was imagination, a trick of the eyes, but deep in my marrow, I knew better. The house had noticed me. Weeks passed. The oddities began to mount, mostly around me. Toys misplaced, doors cracked open that I'd shut. Once I woke up to find all of my clothes laid out across the floor in a perfect spiral. Then the bed began to shake. It was never violent, just a subtle tremor, like something breathing beneath it. I'd scream, my parents would come, and they'd dismiss it as dreams, just a phase, until the whispering started. It always said my name, never more, just my name. One night, I sat up from a cold sweat and saw it again, at the foot of my bed, the same figure, clearer now, human in shape but void of features. just a pulsing, inky blackness. I screamed. My mother rushed in, flipping on the light. It vanished the moment she touched the doorknob, like it had never been there. She comforted me, but her eyes scanned the corners of the room longer than they should have. Something was waking up in that house, and it liked to be seen. Things changed when Lucy saw her. She came into my room one morning, shaking her skin pale like milk. She said she woke up to find a woman dressed in decaying moth-bitten lace standing at the foot of her bed. Her eyes were gone, just hollow recesses in a sunken face, mouth parted in what looked like an almost delighted moan. That was when my parents finally stopped brushing it off, but they wouldn't talk about it, not openly. My father turned to drinking in the evenings, staring long at the corners of the room. My mother prayed under her breath, her rosary beads worn slick. Lucy and I slept with the door locked, not that it ever helped. Two events stand out from those 5 cursed years. One happening during a storm, our second year in. Dad had gone to town. The winds howled like something was dying in the trees. The power flickered constantly. Lucy and I sat on the couch, trying to pretend we could focus on TV. And then the room went dead cold. The television sputtered and went black. The far corner of the room, where a tall antique mirror sat crooked, darkened, not just shadowed, eclipsed. From within that black, something stepped out. Eyes, reflective like wet marble. Then a mouth, wide and cruelly upturned. It smiled. Lucy screamed. I felt her hand crush mine. We ran, tearing up the stairs, slamming our parents' door, and locking it. My mother held us as we cried. But I saw it in her face. She felt it too. The cold, the dread, the presence. The second event happened after my father finally invited a priest, a local man, old and weary. He walked the house muttering in Latin, flicking holy water like it could soak into the bones of the place. That night, the house felt still, not peaceful, waiting. I went to the kitchen for water. The room was pitch dark, but I didn't turn on the light. I didn't want to see my reflection in the window. I just didn't. Then I felt breath on the back of my neck. I turned slowly. It was him. Not a shadow this time. He was real, solid, gaunt, eyes sunken and lidless. One side of his face was melted, charred down to tendon and bone. His shirt hung in tatters. He blocked the doorway, lips twitching like he wanted to speak, but had no tongue to do it. I tried to scream. Couldn't. My knees buckled. I crawled backward, the floor cold as ice beneath me. When he stepped forward, the light overhead shattered. Only then did my father crash through the door. And just like that, the thing vanished. The air left behind smelled of soot and rot. The priest's blessing hadn't cleansed the house. It had provoked it. By our 5th year, the house had become a prison. We were watched constantly. The figure appeared in mirrors, whispered from the drains, laughed beneath the floorboards. Objects flew off shelves. Doors slammed violently. The house would hum sometimes, a deep guttural vibration, like it was purring. We all stopped sleeping. My mother began speaking in half sentences. My father refused to be alone in any room. Lucy started drawing the woman she'd seen, over and over again. Dozens of pages taped to her wall. The eyes were always black holes. We knew we couldn't stay, but the house didn't want us to leave. The night before we moved out, it made its final play. The house shook. Every door flew open. The air dropped below freezing. We watched together as shadows crawled across the walls like living things. Furniture was hurled across the room. The lights flickered until they all blew out. And in the final flash, I swear to God, I saw the scarred man standing at the center of the living room, arms wide, smiling like he was welcoming us home. We slept in the car. We left the next morning, never speaking a word. A few months later, my father found an old newspaper buried in the garage during a visit to clean the place. The man who built the house in the late 1800s had murdered his wife and children, burned them alive in the cellar. Locals had whispered for generations that he'd still walked the halls, unable to leave the place where he'd damned himself. We never went back. Even now, decades later, I wake sometimes and see the faint outline of a figure in the doorway, watching, just watching. I kept the lights on. I don't close my bedroom door anymore, and I never, ever look in mirrors after midnight, because sometimes, just sometimes, I think the house found a way to follow me. When I was a child, my grandmother had a way of spinning stories that made the walls of our quiet house seem to close in. She'd wait until the wind howled through the trees or the lights flickered with the approach of a storm. That's when she'd sit me down and speak in a voice just above a whisper, like the air around her might be listening too. There was one story, though. One she only told me once, and even then, I don't think she meant to. It began the same way every time, with that far-off look in her eyes and the phrase, "I was just a girl during the war." When I was young, I thought she was reciting something from a novel or an old radio drama. It was too bizarre, too unnerving to be real. But later, after she passed and I dug deeper, talked to people, found letters, news clippings, it turned out the story hadn't been borrowed. It was hers. She grew up in a small wartime suburb in New South Wales, a tight-knit place where every doorstep had a flag and every family had someone overseas. When she wasn't in school, she babysat for a neighbor named Deborah, a factory worker whose husband had been drafted and sent to fight in Europe. Deborah had a daughter named Maureen, a soft-spoken, polite little girl with a smile that could melt stone. My grandmother became more than a babysitter. She was like a sister to Maureen. Their days were filled with books and tea parties and simple joy. But all of that changed one November day, when winter crept into the bones of the house and never quite left. When my grandmother arrived that morning, Maureen was wrong. She screamed that her dress was too tight, that the kitchen light was blinding. She threw herself to the floor in a fit of rage, hurling insults and crying so violently her face turned red. My grandmother, stunned, tried to soothe her, but Then she looked into Marine's eyes. They weren't just dilated. They were black. Not in the way pupils adjust to light. Black, like pits. Depthless and cold. She did everything she could to make the room darker. Drew curtains, turned off lights. But nothing helped. Marine writhed and screamed like her skin was being peeled by the sun. Deborah came home early that day. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, like she'd aged decades in a single shift. That was the day she got the call. Her brother, killed in France. But Marine didn't know. No one had told her. She'd started screaming the exact moment Deborah received the telegram. My grandmother said that was when she first felt it. The sense that something was occupying that child. Not living alongside her. Living through her. From that day on, Marine changed. She no longer threw tantrums. She had episodes. Violent ones. She spoke of things she shouldn't have known. Descriptions of faraway battlefields, the smell of rotting flesh, the sounds of men crying for their mothers. Her voice would deepen into something guttural and inhuman when she described it. Sometimes she'd laugh afterward. Other times she'd sit silently for hours, staring at nothing. Every time there was a report from the front lines, another bombing, another wave of casualties. Marine would slip deeper into whatever nightmare had gripped her, and somehow she always seemed to know before the news broke. The town whispered. They said she was cursed. Others used the word possessed. Deborah tried to protect her daughter the only way she knew how, by locking her inside, curtains drawn, doors bolted, but the house couldn't contain whatever had wormed its way into that child's skin. One day, my grandmother came over while Deborah tried to nap on the couch. She was doing dishes when she heard music. A tune, faint and trembling. It didn't come from the radio. It came from the piano. Marine, who had never once taken a lesson, was seated on the bench. Her tiny hands played something so complex, so foreign. My grandmother couldn't comprehend how she was doing it. But the worst part wasn't the music. It was the singing. She was singing in Italian, or maybe Latin. Something old, something wrong. Her voice was too rich, too mature. It didn't belong to a 5-year-old girl. And her eyes? She didn't blink, just stared at my grandmother with this crooked smile that made her skin crawl. Deborah ran into the room, shrieking. Marine kept playing, louder, louder, until it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating with that cursed aria. When they pulled her away from the piano, the silence that followed wasn't relief. It was dread. My grandmother said the air in that house was never rich again. Heavy, thick, like it had a weight of its own. Like it watched you. Soon after, it escalated. My grandmother had just finished cleaning up the kitchen one evening when she heard the door creak upstairs. She thought nothing of it until she looked up. Marine stood at the top of the stairs, in her hand, a straight razor. She descended slowly, silently, leaving behind a trail of blood with every step. The skin of her feet had been flayed, peeled back as though she'd carved it off herself. It hung in strips, trailing behind her like lace. She didn't cry, didn't wince. Her expression was vacant, as if pain didn't apply to her anymore. Then she began to sing again, that same infernal melody. My grandmother said it felt like the walls would crack, like the house was breathing around them. When Deborah rushed her to the hospital, my grandmother stayed behind. She couldn't explain why, but she was drawn to the bathroom to see. What she found made her sick. The skin from Maureen's feet had been carefully arranged on the tiles, not in a pile, but in a pattern, a design, a mosaic that didn't make sense, but felt intentional. It radiated something vile. They said Maureen sang for 36 hours straight in the hospital. When they removed the bandages from her feet, the wounds were gone. She now only responded in Latin. Later that week, Deborah received another call. Maureen's father, Stephen, had gone missing in action, declared MIA, and, as if on cue, Maureen's condition worsened. She slipped into a coma. Deborah was unraveling. Her hair grayed seemingly overnight. Her hands never stopped shaking. Nurses refused to enter Maureen's room alone. One said she woke up with bite marks after sleeping nearby. Another said she heard whispering in the vents, calling her name. And then, Stephen was found alive. The moment Deborah got the call, Maureen stirred. And, just like that, she was back. Almost. My grandmother never went near her again. But the sightings didn't stop. Maureen would appear around town, always alone. Her eyes always found my grandmother, and she'd smile. That smile, like something inside her was amused, like it remembered. Years passed. My grandmother tried to let it go, tried to forget. Then, one rainy afternoon at the market, she ran into Deborah. The woman looked like a shell, haggard, lifeless. When I asked how Marion was doing, Deborah hesitated, then replied in a tone that barely registered as human. She's quiet now, doesn't leave her room much. Then, after a long pause, almost a whisper, sometimes I think she's waiting for something. The last time my grandmother saw Marion was on the steps of the old church at the edge of town. The storm clouds above made the sky look like bruised skin. Marion hadn't aged a day. Same porcelain skin, same dead eyes. When she saw my grandmother, she tilted her head and asked softly, "Do you dream?" My grandmother froze. "Do you close your eyes and see things that aren't there?" Before she could reply, Marion stood, brushed off her dress, and walked into the rain. She was never seen again. But weeks later, Deborah sent my grandmother a letter, her last. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. It said Marion had been quiet that morning, sitting by the window, humming that same song, that same one from the piano, the one that didn't belong to this world. Stephen died that day, crushed beneath machinery at the factory. And when Deborah ran upstairs, Maureen was gone. The window open, curtains fluttering. No footprints, no blood, just silence. And sometimes on nights when the wind howls and the lights flicker, just like they did when I was a kid, I think about that story, and I wonder if she's still out there, still waiting, still singing. I don't know what it is or what it wants, but it followed me home. I just got back last night from what was supposed to be a relaxing week-long vacation with my entire extended family. 18 of us piled into a sprawling estate tucked away in the woods, like some forgotten postcard from another century. The house was beautiful, 2 sections really. The new side was all polished wood floors, massive windows, the kind of place that looks like it belongs on a real estate site, with a price tag you'd never afford. But the old side, that was something else. Something older than just blueprints and age. That's where the problems started. Since my girlfriend and I were the last to arrive, we got the worst room, naturally. It was tiny, 10 by 10 at most, crammed with a bed that felt like it had bones of its own. Worst yet, it was directly across from the basement stairs, the only door in the house that stayed locked, even when you unlocked it. After 6 hours of driving, I was too wiped out to care. Said a few hellos, grabbed a plate of leftovers, and crashed into bed beside my girlfriend, who passed out in record time. She's always been like that. Falls asleep like flipping a switch. I envy it now more than ever. I lay there, though, awake, as that room pressed in on me. You ever feel like the air's watching you? Like it's thick with eyes you can't see, but you feel them blinking in unison? That's what it was like. The pressure in my chest wasn't fear exactly. It was expectation. Something was waiting. I distracted myself by diving into a YouTube rabbit hole, trying not to look at the basement door. About an hour in, my girlfriend began to twitch in her sleep. Then she moaned and flinched, like she was trying to push something away in her dream. I reached out and touched her arm to wake her gently. She screamed, bolted upright, eyes wide but blank, and gasped something. "The ghost!" Then collapsed back into the pillows and resumed snoring like nothing had happened. My heart was hammering. That should have been enough. Should have packed my bags, should have demanded a new room, but I didn't. I stayed. Curiosity is a poison like that. Around 2 a.m., she woke again. Another scream, this time louder. She muttered something that curdled my blood. "The footsteps are close." Then silence. She passed out like someone had flipped her off. I didn't sleep that night. I sat bolt upright in bed, every muscle tight, just scrolling through videos with the volume low, too scared to listen for the sounds I knew I'd hear. On the second night, it escalated. She sat up in bed in the middle of the night, still asleep, and turned toward the far corner of the room. Her eyes were closed, but she started speaking, conversing, quiet, like she was explaining something to someone or something, just standing in the shadows. I couldn't understand a word, but I swear to God, whatever she was talking to answered. Not in words, just movement. Something shifted in that corner. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. The air churned like something had sucked all the warmth out of it. She lay back down like nothing happened. The house stayed mostly quiet after that, at least during the day. But each night, it returned in small ways. Creaks in the floor when no one was walking. Knocks on the walls just behind your head. The unmistakable feeling that something was pacing the hallway just outside the door. But it was the second to last night that broke me. I was half asleep when I felt the bed dip beside me. Instinctively, I reached out to pet the cat. But we didn't bring the cat. I sat up quickly, just in time to see the indention left. The bed was firm, too firm, so whatever had pressed into it had weight, real weight. I looked at my girlfriend. She was facing the other direction, her body nowhere near the spot. No explanation, just cold dread. I drove home the next day, running on fumes and denial. That night, last night, I hoped it was over. It wasn't. My girlfriend went out to meet some friends. I stayed in with the dog, Poppy, and the cat, Anna. I figured maybe now I could breathe, maybe sleep. But it started within the hour. Anna suddenly froze, then began tracking something. Her head moved like she was watching a fly zip across the room. But there was nothing. Poppy growled low, her body trembling as her eyes followed the same invisible path across the apartment. Quick and darting, like a child on too much sugar. I've seen my pets track insects before, but this was different. Intent. Coordinated. Poppy backed into me, her heckles up. Anna jumped onto the couch beside me, staring unblinking into the corner of the room. When whatever moved, Poppy barked, snapping her teeth at empty air. Then I heard it. A high-pitched growl. Not quite a dog, not quite human, ripped through the center of the room. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, like it had erupted from inside the walls. My blood ran cold. I stood, voice trembling, and said, "Please leave." Goosebumps covered my entire body. I felt it notice me, not just hear me, notice, like it had been ignoring me until I acknowledged it. I repeated myself louder, firmer this time, and opened the front door. It didn't move, not at first. Then, like a sulking child, it seemed to shuffle toward the door. My animals followed it with their eyes. I thought it was free. But 2 minutes later, Poppy began growling at the same damn corner, barking again with renewed panic. Anna stared through the darkness, her pupils blown wide. I was too tired to be afraid anymore. I just gave up. Put in my earbuds, tried to distract myself from the icy chill that settled over the room, despite the thermostat holding steady at 72 degrees Fahrenheit. I tried to ignore the knocks, the pokes, the tug on my nostrils like a toddler trying to wake me. And then it started poking me. Not violently, just annoyingly. My legs, my arms, the bottoms of my feet. Every 5 minutes, like clockwork. Then it tugged at my face, that same childlike tug, over and over. It wasn't trying to hurt me. It was trying to get my attention. It wanted me to play. When my girlfriend finally came home, everything stopped. No growls, no pokes, no movement. It was like someone had flicked the light off inside a room I hadn't realized I was trapped in. That night, I slept. I didn't know what followed me home. I don't know if it ever belonged to that house. Maybe it latched on to me before I got there. Maybe it was waiting for me. But I can still feel it, hovering just outside the threshold of my thoughts. I haven't heard it tonight, not yet. But the corner of the room still feels too dark. My dog keeps glancing over there, And Anna, she won't come into the room anymore. If anyone knows what I'm dealing with or how to stop it, please. I'm afraid if I speak to it again, it'll answer. It was the kind of October night that makes the world feel thin. The kind of night where the moon hangs fat and glowing in a sky too still, and the woods breathe with a low whispering wind that sounds a little too much like voices if you listen too long. Pete and I had thought it perfect for a scare. Harmless, stupid fun. That's how it always starts, right? We were high school seniors, clinging to the last scraps of childhood mischief before the world would tighten its grip. Pete, my best friend since we were old enough to bloody each other's noses and then laugh about it, had come up with a plan. Take our younger siblings out to the abandoned schoolhouse in the woods and give them the fright of their lives. Let's rig up some kind of dummy, Pete said. Tell them it's haunted. Watch them scream. I laughed. God help me. I loved the idea. A little fear never hurt anyone, I told myself. The schoolhouse was a relic. Half-rotten boards, sunken roofline, windows like blind, milky eyes. We'd gone there once, back in elementary school for a field trip. Even then, it gave me the creeps, like we'd stepped into a place the world had already buried and forgotten. But that day, as we scouted it out, something was different. Older, hungrier. The place looked as though it had been sinking into the earth, like the trees were growing around it to keep it from leaving. The windows were worse than I had remembered, black with grime, but behind the filth, it felt like something watched. But that's when we found the cemetery. It wasn't much, just a handful of crumbling headstones behind the building, half swallowed by weeds and vine. No gate, no markers, just names. Thomas, Emily, Clara, in short spans between birth and death, all mid-1800s, child-sized graves. Pete grinned, and I just stared. The laughter stuck in my throat. I didn't remember this from the field trip. I didn't remember anyone mentioning it. Dude, Pete said, eyes bright. This is perfect. Say the school's haunted by the kids who died here. Boom. Instant terror. But I didn't answer. Not really. Because something about it felt wrong. Not funny wrong, but wrong in that way your bones recognize before your brain catches up. Still, I helped him set up the dummy. Just a pair of jeans stuffed with hay, a shirt, a mask. We strung it from a branch near the school's side entrance, like a bad omen waiting in the trees. Then we left, laughing, pretending we weren't unnerved. Pete picked me up just after dark. His twin brothers, about 10, sat in the back, jittery and excited. My sisters, only a couple of years younger than me, rolled their eyes when I climbed in beside them. But I could see it, the unease creeping in under their sarcasm. We told them the story on the way, how the school was built over cursed ground, how the original teacher went mad and buried her students behind the building, how kids still vanished in those woods. Some say it's the ghosts. Some say it's something else. They laughed nervously. But as we pulled off the main road and into the tree-lined dirt path, the laughter died. It was quiet in a way that wasn't natural. Even the bugs had stopped. We parked at the trailhead. No other cars. No moonlight now either. Just shadows too long for the trees that cast them. I led with the flashlight. Pete brought up the rear. The schoolhouse came into view slowly, its frame rising like the husk of a forgotten god, too tall and too still. The kids fell silent. Even Pete's usually obnoxious brothers were clinging to each other. And then I saw it. Just a flicker, movement in the schoolhouse window, a shadow that crossed the glass. Fast, deliberate. I stopped cold. Pete, I whispered. Someone's in there. He grinned. Nice try. But I wasn't trying. My skin had gone cold. My breath came in shallow gasps. I pointed my light at the window, but it was just the filmy pane reflecting the beam back at me, distorting everything like warped glass in a funhouse mirror. We pressed on. Pete opened the door. It groaned like a dying animal. Inside, it smelled like rotten, wet dirt. Dust curled in the beam of our lights, and the air felt heavy, like breathing underwater. Then, his flashlight caught something. Legs. Just a pair of bare, pale legs gliding across the far side of the room, vanishing behind the old teacher's desk. The girl wore an old-fashioned dress, something out of a century-old photo. Her feet didn't touch the ground. We froze. Pete's mouth was open, like he wanted to laugh but couldn't remember how. My throat locked up. The kids were behind us, growing restless, whispering. She's in here, I said. She's still in here. Pete snapped back to life. All right, let's wrap it up, he said, a little too loud. Outside, everyone out. We scrambled out the front door. Me, Pete, the kids. Just in time to see that dummy we'd hung in the tree was gone. In its place stood a man. He was tall, not wearing a costume. Not Kevin. This wasn't the prank. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could see the eyes. Dark, fixed, wrong. He didn't speak. He didn't move at first. Then he did, and we ran. The woods came alive with panic. Branches tore at our face. I grabbed my sister's hands and pulled, trying to stay together. Pete and his brothers were somewhere behind us. I didn't look back. But as we neared the parking lot, something went horribly wrong. I noticed the footsteps didn't match the number of people I brought. There were too many. And then I saw her, running beside my sisters. The third girl. I only had two sisters. This girl had pigtails, tied with faded red ribbons. Her dress was the same. Antique, grayish, old-timey. Her skin too pale. Her feet made no sound as they touched the ground. Her eyes were empty. I reached out, my hand trembling, brushing her shoulder. She turned slowly. And then she went up, into the trees, not climbing, rising. The shadows swallowed her whole. My sisters saw it too. We didn't speak. We just ran. At the cars, Pete and his brothers were already laughing. Kevin was there, and Samantha, both in on the prank. Kevin had played the man in the woods. Samantha had worn our mom's old wool skirt to play the ghost. They'd rigged the whole thing for laughs. Only they hadn't brought the third girl. They swore it. Swore by God and everything holy. I laughed along with them. Said nothing. I didn't want to drag it back into the light. That girl, that thing, wasn't part of any game. and I never returned to that schoolhouse. Some things, some places, they remember, and sometimes when the moon is full, they wait. I'm in my 30s now, and I've had more than a few brushes with the kind of things people don't like to admit are real. Shadows with weight, sounds that don't have sources, moments where the air shifts and something in your bones whispers, run. Both of my parents served in the military, which meant my childhood was a parade of base housing and temporary homes scattered across Europe and the US. I never really had a hometown, but I can tell you exactly where the fear started. I was 15. We were stationed in Portugal, living in this ancient stone house tucked on the edge of a small village. It looked like it had been carved from the earth itself, old, cold, and quiet in that way that makes your ears ring from the silence. My bedroom was small, tucked into the attic, with warped floorboards and a closet door that never quite stayed shut. That door, God, I hated that door. I don't care what anyone says, something lived in that closet, not in the walls, not in my imagination, in the closet. It wasn't just the creaking or the scratching, it was the way it watched. I never saw it directly, but I'd wake up frozen, unable to breathe, while something just behind the cracked door exhaled, waiting. Eventually, we moved back to the States. I told myself it was just stress, the sleep paralysis they talk about on the internet, the overactive imagination of a lonely teenager. I buried it. I forgot it. Until years later. I was 23 when I transferred to parks. I'd already been working as a state park ranger, but I landed a new position at a park that preserved an old utopian religious site, a historic commune, they called it. I was excited. It combined two things I loved, history and the outdoors. But when I told my coworkers where I was transferring, I got the same reaction every time. Oh, you're going to Colt Park. Creepy place. They said it with smirks, but there was always something cold behind their jokes. I laughed it off. I wasn't some ghost hunting thrill seeker. I had a job to do, and I was damn good at it. On my first day at the new park, a volunteer gave me the full tour. She was chipper, maybe in her late 50s, and clearly loved the place. She told me there were once over 100 buildings here, homes, schools, temples, even a massive bakery. Now only 13 structures remained, preserved like relics from a forgotten world. We went into the bakery next. At first, nothing felt wrong. We were on the main floor, behind the glass, looking at flour-stained aprons and rusted baking tools. But then she pointed to the stairwell and said, "We're allowed up. Come on." I took the lead. Halfway up the stairs, it hit me. That same feeling from Portugal. That same wrongness. Like something old was pressing its weight into my chest, watching from a crack in reality. I stopped. Do I do I have to go up there? She sighed. Oh, you're one of those. One of what? I asked, my voice dry. Ghost people, she said dismissively. Let's move on. You'll get used to it. But I didn't get used to it. Every building after that had the same heavy stillness, not just old, occupied. I kept waiting to hear footsteps that weren't ours, breathing that wasn't mine, whispers under the sound of birdsong. 2 weeks later, I was on the early field shift. That meant opening the buildings before the park opened to the public, disarming alarms, checking for damage, the usual. I'd done this before. Usually I could keep the nerves at bay if I just focused on the tasks. The bakery was the worst. Always was. But today, I had to open the founder's home. That one had a reputation. It was the house and the man who started the cult. The man who believed he could speak directly to God and that death was just a barrier to be overcome with enough faith and fire. The house was built like a symmetrical shrine. When you walked in, 2 staircases stretched up either side, and beneath them were small closets used for storage. The alarm system was tucked in the left closet. When you unlocked the front door, a blaring alarm would go off, and you had exactly 60 seconds to unlock the closet and punch in the code, or the cops would be called. I had it down to a rhythm. Door key, open, walk straight, closet key, unlock, disarm. Simple. That morning, I stepped inside, and the alarm immediately started screaming. I fumbled with the keys as I stepped forward. Then I froze. Something was already standing in the room. A figure, at the base of the staircase to my right. It wasn't a person. It was the absence of a person. A silhouette without detail, darker than the shadows, like it had soaked up all the light in the room. No face, no features, just eyes, if they were even eyes, like sunken holes carved into a mannequin. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't move. But then it moved. It didn't run, it didn't climb, it glitched, like a VHS skipping frames. It jerked up the stairs with unnatural speed, limbs too long and too fast, like gravity didn't apply to it. I dropped the keys and bolted out the door, gasping, heart thundering, the alarm still howling inside. I paced the porch, dry heaving, trying to convince myself that what I saw wasn't real. But I knew. Every part of my body knew. I radioed the ranger station and told them I'd missed the alarm, disarm. Lied and said I just fumbled the keys. The ranger on duty just said, "It happens. Finish your rounds. Come up when you're done." When I got there, he didn't scold me. He didn't ask questions. He just looked at me for a long moment and said, "You saw something, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He nodded and said, "I wanted you to come to your own conclusion before we talked." That ranger had worked there for almost 20 years, and he'd seen things. They all had. But no one wanted to talk about it unless they had to. Like saying it out loud made it stronger. The rest of the staff was split. Some said it was just old buildings and creaky wood and suggestions. Others, well, they'd seen the man in the staircase too, or something worse. I worked there for 5 more years. The feeling never left. I never saw the shadow again. Not clearly, but sometimes I'd hear the closet door in the founder's home creak open, even when it was locked. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps on the upper floors, or I was the only one on site. Sometimes I'd feel the same pressure in my chest again, like something was standing just behind me, smiling and waiting. I grew up in a house that was never meant to be a home. It stood like a forgotten relic in a nowhere town in the Midwest, a rotting Victorian that once served as a hotel in the late 1800s. My parents bought it for next to nothing, a motivated seller, they said. I think now that the seller wasn't motivated. He was terrified, desperate to be rid of something that had grown too loud to ignore. From the outside, it looked like every ghost story you'd ever heard. Wrapped wood siding bleached gray by sun and wind, shattered attic windows like empty eye sockets staring down at the street. But we moved in anyway. That's what you do when you're young and broke and clinging to the idea of stability. At first, it was little things. The expected haunted house cliches, creaking floorboards, footsteps on the stairs, fleeting shadows just outside your peripheral vision. You'd swear someone stood at the foot of your bed until you blinked. Then it was just air. Empty, still, watching. We told ourselves it was just an old house with old house sounds. But the basement, Jesus Christ, the basement. It was different. There's no rational way to describe it. Even in the heat of winter, it excelled winter. Not cold like air conditioning, cold like the bottom of a well, like something buried deep beneath the concrete was still breathing. I left home in my 20s, fled, really. The West Coast offered excuses I didn't question. School, work, soul searching. But the truth is, something in that house had begun to pay attention to me. And I knew if I had stayed, it would finish whatever it had started. Years later, I visited home for the holidays. My sister pulled me aside after dinner. "We've been talking to a ghost," she said, like it was nothing. Like she was mentioning a stray cat that started sleeping in the garage. I laughed until my entire family, my mother, my sisters, even my damn father, backed her up. They told me about the radio. It started with static. Then, whenever someone would enter the room alone, the radio would flicker to life on its own. One night, in a half-joking tone, my sister said aloud, "If you're a ghost, can you stop messing with the radio?" It clicked off. She waited a moment, trying not to tremble, then whispered, "If you're real, turn it back on." And it did. That was the beginning. They developed a system. Volume up meant yes. Volume down meant no. The radio's volume bar ran from 0 to 30. So 1 became A, 2 became B, 3 was C, and so on. If it shut off mid-question, that meant the question was off limits. He called himself Jason. He said he was 5 when he died in 1905. Claimed he lived in the house with his mother and father, though when asked about his father, the volume would drop to 0, and the radio would shut off violently, as though the air itself soured when his name was spoken. They stopped asking him about it after that. What disturbed me most wasn't what Jason said. It was how real it became. He proved himself again and again. He pushed crayons across the table, rang the doorbell at impossible times. One night, he even printed a message from the wireless printer that simply said, "Still here." I went back home later that year, hoping for my own experience. Instead, the house was silent. The radio never flickered. Every time I entered the room, it turned off. My sisters would call me back in, and the air would grow thick. Jason didn't want to speak to me, wouldn't even acknowledge me. And then I remembered. I'd been lying in bed the year I left when I felt a hand run through my hair. Small, playful, like a child waking a parent. I panicked. I leapt from bed, heart pounding, and shouted into the dark like an idiot. You don't know who I am or what I'm capable of. Try that again and you'll regret it. That's when the picture frames flew off my desk. All of them. They didn't fall. They hurled themselves across the room. Glass shattered in every corner. I slept at a friend's house that night and pretended it never happened. Now, I knew better. I waited until the house was still and whispered, Jason, if that was you that night, I'm sorry. I was scared. I didn't mean to be cruel. The radio turned on. I swallowed hard. Are you Jason? Volume up. Was that you I yelled at? Volume up again. I'm sorry. Can we be friends? The volume went up and stayed. That was the beginning of something stranger than anything we'd known before. Jason became active again. We'd ask him about the afterlife. He claimed he could travel anywhere instantly. So, as a test, we called a family friend on the West Coast. They placed a newspaper on the table. We asked Jason to read the date. The radio turned off, then back on. The volume clicked up to 17. Close, we thought. The date on the paper was the 18th. But Jason didn't like being doubted. 17, 17, 17. Over and over. The friend double-checked and went pale. He's right. I misread it. The paper's from the 17th. Jason didn't answer questions about God, said they were off limits. One time he said he didn't sleep. Another time he told my sister he did. There were contradictions, gaps, errors, like a child trying to wear the mask of something older. When asked how long he'd been around, he told my sister, through volume pulses, that he'd stayed until her 28th birthday. After that, he and his family would move on to the next phase. He never explained what that meant, and after her 28th, he was gone. But before that, he got stronger. He stopped replying on the radio. He started branching out. Printers printed blank papers with one word in the center. Soon. TVs flickered to static when no one held the remote. Phones buzzed with impossible messages. My mother got a text from her own phone that said, I see you. She was home in the Midwest. I was on the West Coast. I texted her back. Did you send that? She hadn't. I sent another. Hi, Jason. And I got a reply. Hi again. No contact number. No reply when I called. It just happened. My sister once got a call from a contact saved as Mr. President with a profile pic of Obama. When she answered, it was static and then silent. When we asked the radio if that was Jason, the volume laughed upward. We tried to document it all. Recordings failed. Videos were deleted or glitched out. He didn't want to be seen. Or maybe he couldn't be. We even tried researching the house, found records of a 5-year-old boy dying there in 1905 of illness. The name wasn't Jason, but the timeline matched. The age matched. The story matched. Except, how did a 5-year-old know how to spell? How to manipulate technology? How to read volume numbers, text, travel across space? Unless it wasn't really a boy at all. Unless Jason was only the name it wore. The house is quiet now. My family still lives there. The radio sits on a shelf in my sister's old room. No static, no whispers, just silence. She's in her 30s now, long past the date he promised he'd leave. But sometimes I wonder if he really moved on, or if he's just waiting, waiting for something, or possibly someone. It's impossible to prove any of what I'm about to tell you. No photos, no video. Nothing tangible you could hold up in a courtroom or a laboratory. All I have is my memory, and even that has been stained and warped by time. But I know what I lived through. I believe it happened. And sometimes I think that's even worse than proof. Because if it's true, then there's something else walking beside us in this world. Always just out of sight. Something that watches, listens, and waits. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was a cheerful child once, the kind of kid who found joy in the smallest of things. Books, make-believe, stories, whispered in the dark. My family didn't understand me. I was the quiet one, the dreamer. And then, as puberty wrapped its cold fingers around my throat, I did what most lonely kids do. I fell in love. Hopelessly, entirely, devastatingly. She wasn't anyone remarkable. Not then. Not until one morning. I looked at her and saw divinity. It was like a spell had been cast over me. I no longer saw a girl. I saw the only girl. The axis upon which my fragile little world spun. I would have given anything to hold her hand, anything to hear her say she felt the same. Of course, she didn't. But we were close. That was the cruelest part. We shared secrets, laughter, private little jokes. We danced around the blurred lines of maybe. Hope kept me hanging on until she crushed it beneath her heel by falling for my best friend. The betrayal cut deep, but oddly, it didn't sever me from her. No, it welded me to her. Obsession wrapped itself around grief, and something inside me began to rot. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. And in that downward spiral of adolescent heartbreak and emotional starvation, I found the one thing that promised control: the occult. It started small, reading grimoires and dusty internet forums late into the night. But soon, I was skipping meals to read about Eastern European folk rituals, especially those dealing with the devil. Not Satan, not Lucifer, no fire and brimstone. I mean the devil in a more local, older sense. Something cunning, serpentine, and dangerously ambiguous. A being not evil outright, but wild and hungry. A thing bound by rules you barely understand, if you're lucky. That's who I reached out to. I gathered the items: a red string, a smooth stone, and cheap candles I'd stolen from my grandmother's hutch. The ritual was simple: light the candles, speak the words, bind the spirit. The string would symbolize its tail, the stone its prison. As long as I kept both items safe and untouched, it would obey me. I hid the stone among my books, my safe place, and the string, I slipped it beneath the foot of my bed frame so it would never move. No pets, no siblings, foolproof. Midway through the ritual, though, I realized I didn't even know what I wanted. Her love? One perfect day, a kiss, eternal devotion? I panicked and said, "Make all my wishes come true." Those words echo in me still. The next day, I forgot all about it until she called me. Not a text, an actual call on one of those clunky 2008 phones that made everything feel deliberate. She had never called me before. She asked to see me, just the two of us. We walked and talked, and I remember feeling like the world had slipped into a dream. The day was golden, too golden. More followed, a surge of impossible luck, coincidences stacked like bricks. It was all too good. That's when I remembered the ritual. I laughed it off. I'm a master demonologist now, I joked to myself. And then one day, I came home to find my room had been tidy. My grandmother had cleaned. The string was gone, the stone displaced. That night, luck snapped. The descent was sharp and brutal. Nightmares returned with a vengeance. My best friend, the one she had chosen over me, turned on me without reason, cold and cruel. When I asked him years later, he had no memory of it. My great-grandmother died. Then, my other one. Legal battles erupted over the house. We lost everything. We moved away. I lost my room, my sanctuary, my friends, my memories. All of it was swallowed in one dark wave. And that's when it began. No shadow figures, no whispering voices, just presence. Pure, suffocating, malignant presence. Every time the power went out, and it often did in our unfinished apartment, I'd feel it, breathing on the back of my neck, inches away. I carried flashlights everywhere. I slept with one in my hand. My mind was cracking. It fed on my loneliness. Then the visions started. The symbols came first. At night, I'd wake up to see them painted across the walls. Black, writhing sigils that bled into one another. I couldn't read them, but I felt them. Like laughter etched in ink. Like mockery carved in coal. I stopped reacting. What else could I do? Fear had become mundane. But then, it stepped up its game. I remember the night perfectly. Footsteps outside my window. Pacing. I went out, found nothing. Went back to bed. Then, click. The door creaked open behind me. I sighed, annoyed. And then click. It shut again. I froze. The footsteps. Inside my room. No paralysis. I could move. I just didn't want to. The chair by my desk scraped across the floor. And then, fingers. Tapping, tapping, tapping on the wood. Taunting me. Waiting. I finally turned around. The room was empty. Everything is perfectly in place. And when I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face, I saw it. A splash of blood across the white tile behind me. I turned, heart pounding. Still there. No one in the house was hurt. No pranks, no explanation, just blood. And a silence so thick it made the light flicker. It didn't end. The thing came back stronger, hungrier. Sometimes it wore the faces of my loved ones in dreams, warped, eyeless versions of them with crooked grins. I'd wake to find the symbols still smeared across my walls, glowing faintly like coals. I begged it to leave me, screen protection spells I barely understood, drew sigils on every surface. Eventually, I stood in my doorway and invited it to leave. The air shifted, and for a while, things were quiet, but it never really left. Now, years later, I still have nightmares. Sometimes I wake in a sweat, waiting for the tapping to start again. Sometimes I dream of a red string, frayed and curling beneath my bed. I still read about the occult. I still wonder. I've made peace with what happened, or at least tried to. But I'll never forget the 3 rules I learned. Number 1, know what you're speaking to. Number 2, know what you're asking for. Number 3, never lose the items that bind it. I don't expect you to believe me, but if you've listened this far, maybe some part of you already does. And maybe, just maybe, that means it's watching you now too. Some things are best left unbound. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true ghost stories. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the rest of the members of Back to Ashes. Thank you so much for your continuous support. And as I always say, without you, I would not have a voice and there would not be a Back to Ashes. Thank you. If you are new to the channel, thank you so much for tuning in and for your support. I invite you to leave a like and a comment, and if you'd like to become part of the Back to Ashes family, please subscribe and tap that bell to always. That way you will always know when I upload a video. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. In the meantime, please take care of yourselves and stay vigilant. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.